It's my pleasure to welcome you all today and to welcome Ambassador Rose Gottmuller. You know her background and you know the topic, but let me just set the context a little bit. We all recognize that with the end of the New START treaty, or at least the decision about whether to extend it once for 5 years, we're coming to a crossroads on nuclear arms control. The arms control approaches of the past must either adapt or die, essentially. Adapt to a world that's no longer bipolar, is increasingly multipolar, to adapt to the fact that our strategic competition isn't just nuclear, it's got other dimensions, offense, defense, kinetic, non-kinetic, outer space, etc. We also, I think, recognize that we're at a crossroads in the non-proliferation and disarmament effort. This is not just a review year for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is a 25th anniversary renew year after the 25th anniversary review and extension conference 25 years ago, at which a decision was made to indefinitely and sort of unconditionally extend the treaty. But an indefinite extension is not the same thing as permanent. And there is today, of course, a rising discussion driven in part by the advocates of the Nuclear Ban Treaty to take a different approach. So crossroads, think crossroads. In our general non-proliferation and disarmament and arms control strategies, we face a period of renewal or decay. There is no better person qualified to help us both understand this new landscape and its implications for U.S. policy and its implications for the U.S. nuclear weapons laboratory community than Ambassador Rose Gottmuller. Most of you are familiar with her role as lead negotiator of the New START Treaty. She went on to serve as Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, Non-Proliferation, and Political Military Affairs. And from that role, she went on to be the Deputy Secretary General at NATO, a position that she relinquished in the late autumn. She's now has 3 affiliations, 2 across the bay. One is a distinguished lecturer at the Freeman Spogli Institute at Stanford University. A second as a research fellow at the Hoover Institution. And her third affiliation, I'm happy to announce, is with us. She's a senior fellow at the Center for Global Security Research, and you'll see a lot more of Rose in our activities in the coming years, and we very much welcome that. Prior to her service in government, she was a longtime affiliate of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and served as director of its center in Moscow at that critical turning point time, 2006 to 2008, when President Putin turned a large corner in his view of the security environment in which Russia sits, its relationship with the United States, the values of arms control, etc. Our ground rules today are we're on the record for the period of the presentation. Rose is going to speak for approximately 45 minutes. And then we'll take round the room discussion for as long as there's energy in the discussion or when noon comes up upon us. The Q&A portion will be off the record. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Rose Gottmuller.
Thank you, Brad. It's truly a pleasure to be back at Livermore this morning and to see so many friends and old colleagues in the room. I always enjoy my trips here. I always find them very stimulating intellectually, and I'm looking for no less today. It's interesting that you use the words adaptability and renewal in your introduction, Brad, because that's exactly what I'm planning to talk about today. I realized when I started writing this talk that I had carved out for myself a huge territory to cover, both future arms control and non-proliferation strategies and looking at near-term efforts and then looking into the longer term as well. It's really a bit daunting, to tell you the truth, but I am going to give it a try. I wanted to begin for you with my basic assumption that weapons of mass destruction arms control is not dead, which is fashionable to proclaim these days. I assume that WMD arms control is not dead because we humans have gotten used to negotiated restraint, if only as a way to avoid building up arms that are not really useful on a day-to-day basis to defend us and our interests. If we overspend on weapons of mass destruction, then we underspend on other systems, conventional weapons, yes, but also systems such as reconnaissance, command and control, communication systems that are needed to make our defenses effective every day. It's a budget argument in essence and an opportunity cost estimate, opportunity cost argument as well. And I think it also is honed in my own mind with my experience at NATO and the burden sharing debate at NATO, where obviously it's a slightly different issue, but in Europe it's a matter of the trade-off between building up defenses properly in the NATO context, the 2% rule that has been present and that allies have all signed up to, juxtaposed against continuing demands for social welfare programs. So this notion of opportunity costs in the defense and deterrence sphere have been much before me in recent years at NATO, but I think it's apropos here. I also wanted to emphasize that we should only engage in weapons of mass destruction, arms control, and non-proliferation activities if they are in the U.S. national interest. Sometimes people get sloppy and treat arms control as a natural good, a goal in and of itself. Every weapons of mass destruction negotiation must begin with the basic question: can we seek, and will we find, an outcome that is in the interest of U.S. national security? So arms control is not dead. I'm starting with that assumption, and we can find national security reasons to pursue both arms control and non-proliferation negotiations. What should be the basic principles to help us set priorities and fashion successful outcomes? I'm going to start with some ideas that I think could lead to near-term wins in this arena, which could help address the gloomy picture that so many are embracing nowadays. To begin with, concepts that have been tried and proven true over 40-plus years of arms control regimes are still available to us, and we should not think we have to throw everything out and reinvent the wheel. We should take advantage of them. A fine example here is the concept of freedom to mix, wherein a party to an arms control treaty is given the opportunity to decide just how many weapon systems of a certain type he wants to deploy within a certain negotiated ceiling, choosing not to deploy others. It is already clear that Russia has made that calculation for New START, expressing a willingness to bring its new hypersonic glide vehicle, HGV, the Avant-Garde system, as well as their new heavy ICBM, the Sarmat, under the 700 deployed delivery vehicle limit of the New START treaty. They will come in as new types of existing missiles, the Avant-Garde because it is launched on a two-stage version of the SS-19 ICBM, and the Sarmat because it is replacing the SS-18 heavy missile. Russia, it seems, has already decided how many normal ICBMs, I use that advisedly, normal ICBMs, it will forego to have a certain number of HGVs in its arsenal. In other words, they have decided what part of their established arsenal they will cut back to make way for these new and more exotic systems. I would guess they will keep the HGV number limited, not wanting to lose the potent predictability of their existing ICBM force. To me, this is an important reason to extend the New START treaty to keep both the Avant-Garde and Sarmat under the 700 delivery vehicle limit of New START, where they have to compete with existing Russian ICBMs and SLBMs, and where the Russians would have to decide very carefully about what trade-offs they would make. Again, opportunity costs to bear in mind. Another example of a tried and true concept that we need to sustain is non-interference with national technical means, NTM, National Technical Means of Verification. Overhead satellites, big ground-based radars, reconnaissance aircraft, these are traditional NTM. We need to continue to nurture and support this non-interference concept for one simple reason. NTM allow us to tailor and limit the number of on-site inspections, which bear cost to our weapon systems operators. Every time an on-site inspection is called at a base, it shuts down base operations for a period of the inspections, thus affecting operating tempo. Both we and the Russians have come to respect and utilize the concept. that is, non-interference with NTM, it was actually one of the easiest articles to negotiate in the New START treaty because we both recognize this benefit. Now, I think it's an early way in which we can begin to build interest and confidence in the arms control process among those who have not participated before, and I'm thinking specifically about the Chinese. They, and others like them, need to understand that a lot can be done to tailor and limit on-site inspection if all parties agree that NTM will be allowed to operate unimpeded. I do want to note here that the concept of NTM should be adjusted to new technical realities, and I'll come back to that later in the lecture. I know there's some interest around this room in that topic. Another way to promulgate near-term wins is to look for plays that can be rerun fairly easily. The 2002 Moscow Treaty, or SORT, it was called the Strategic Offensive Reduction Treaty, was a brilliant play by the Bush administration, which cut the number of deployed warheads well below the START treaty number of 6,000. Although there is no formal link between START and SORT, START remained in force while the further reductions were implemented, meaning that the verification regime of START helped to ensure compliance with this further commitment in the Moscow Treaty. This play could be rerun today if the Trump administration would like a quick win on the arms control front, and I am betting that they do because the president would very much like to go to Moscow in May, as he's been invited by President Putin to attend the 75th anniversary of World War II, of the conclusion of World War II. Way back in 2013, the Joint Chiefs of Staff had already determined that they could accept an up to 1/3 further reduction in operationally deployed warheads, which would take the 1,550 warhead limit in the New START treaty down to approximately 1,000. If New START is at the same time extended to 2026, then its verification regime could ensure compliance with these further commitments, just as the START treaty remaining in force as SORT came into force ensured compliance with the commitments of the SORT treaty. The play could be an important win for the president. And I wanted to note one other thing I think is important. The way in which the current administration in Washington has played a New START extension by treating it as something that can happen in due course, but we don't need to panic. Let's think about it. Clearly there are some in the administration who are opposed to extension of New START. But nevertheless, it has been a clever strategy for forcing the Russians to come the way of the United States on this issue. The Russians had loaded up New START extension with a number of conditions, including incorporating missile defense constraints into further reductions, including dealing with, as they call them, prompt global strike, highly accurate conventional systems. And they had also insisted that they wanted their compliance concerns about New START dealt with before they would agree to an extension of the New START treaty. Their compliance concerns generally revolve around the conversion of Trident submarine tubes to basically take them out of effective launcher, operational launcher standing, and also they have to do with conversion of some of our bomber forces. But what has happened essentially is the Russians have dropped all those conditions now and are just asking for the extension of New START. So I frankly think it's been a rather smart play by the current administration to take this point of view. We'll see how it plays out in the end. But I do think there is an opportunity for a quick win for the president. We could call it perhaps a new Moscow treaty, or perhaps we would call it something that would be apropos to the current administration. Perhaps the Mar-a-Lago Treaty would be apropos. So anyway, that's just my idea. If innovations have proven their worth, then they can be turned to the task of producing new wins as well. An excellent example are the reentry vehicle on-site inspections of New START. RVOSI, as it is called, is designed to ensure that we are accounting for the proper number of nuclear warheads on a given missile, which is chosen at random for inspection. Using soft covers or shrouds, inspectors are able to count the nuclear warheads on a missile and we undertook tough negotiations to ensure that the covers were pliable enough to show all the bumps, and I think there are probably some experts in this room who contributed to those tough negotiations. If there are more objects on the front end of a missile than the declared number of warheads, then the inspected party has to prove that they are non-nuclear objects, for example, decoys to confuse missile defense interceptors. Detection system. Also a tough negotiation to ensure that the detector could discern nuclear from non-nuclear but not give up other secrets about design, also an issue of concern to this audience. RVOSI has been a success in New START, and now it is time to think about what other negotiations might benefit from discerning nuclear from non-nuclear in an inspection regime. Here I think immediately of a replacement for the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty. It's a funny artifact of history that as it was officially called, the Short and Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty actually banned all ground-launched missiles of intermediate range from 500 to 5,500 kilometers, nuclear and conventional. That is the reason that the Chinese have no interest in entering into a redo of the INF Treaty. They are assuming that all intermediate range ground-launched missiles would have to be banned, thus doing them out of the heart of their most accurate force posture, both nuclear and conventional, both accurate and numerous, I may add. I argue, however, that the RVOSI tool can be used to do what I call putting the N back in INF. We should talk to the Chinese about having more options now. We could ban only nuclear-armed intermediate-range missiles that are ground-based. Or, although it would be more challenging, we could set a limit on the number of nuclear-armed missiles that would be allowed. Here is where it would be useful to bring in the NTM discussion too. National technical means can be used to determine that a base does not contain nuclear weapons, thus helping to limit the facilities subject to on-site inspection. More thought, of course, will have to go into planning such an inspection regime, and I'm not offering up a final ripe idea on this today, but I do want to note that we made progress on this very set of issues with the reentry vehicle on-site inspections of the New START Treaty. It is now possible to contemplate a much more ambitious INF treaty than we were able to contemplate in the mid-1980s. If such efforts are successful, they will provide a hopeful path also, I think, to begin to disentangle in general the destabilizing co-deployment of dual-use nuclear and conventional systems. And believe me, again, at NATO, the set of issues that surround Russian conventional and nuclear co-location, they are not limited by any means to the new 9M729 Glickum, the system that violates the INF Treaty. They are much associated with the Iskander system that is deployed in the heart of NATO territory in Kaliningrad on the borders of Poland and Lithuania, and also now deployed or near to deployment in Crimea, so that they are able also to target our southern allies, Romania in particular, Bulgaria and Turkey. So I think it is very important that we begin to think seriously about the notion of how we can lend more stability to this kind of co-deployment and having some procedures available for discerning nuclear from conventional could be helpful here. By the way, this was a very good topic, I thought, in our workshop last week that Brad Roberts hosted here at Livermore, and so my remarks today are cueing off that very good discussion that we had last week. So, I've been talking about arms control, which I think about a lot, probably too much. Now I'd like to talk about some ways to rethink non-proliferation strategies. Here too, we need to take advantage of our experience in order to garner new successes, with the end goal of strengthening the non-proliferation regime. A principle to consider here is to play to the non-proliferation strengths of even the most doubtful opponents or counterparts. So let me talk about the example of Pakistan. Pakistan has been the quintessential proliferator, with A.Q. Khan nearly 2 decades ago speaking publicly of having sold weapons technology, nuclear weapons technology, to Libya, Iran, and North Korea. Since that time, Khan has faded from view, but Pakistan was never really willing to come clean about his role, or indeed to allow him to be questioned by outsiders. In more recent times, Pakistan has continued to build up their nuclear arsenal, moving beyond ground launch systems to seek a full triad with air and sea-based systems, as well as articulate a robust nuclear policy. It's always been amusing to me that they and the Russians have the same option going, with a kind of nuclear escalate to de-escalate option. I'm not sure they realize that they're sharing each other's company, but they are. The Pakistanis do not acknowledge any destabilizing aspect of their actions and continue to justify everything they do in the nuclear realm with reference to threats from their neighbor, India. Is there anything that can be done to temper this course in Islamabad and turn Pakistan into a more responsible non-proliferation actor? In answer, at least in partial answer, I wanted to take note of the success gained in engaging Pakistan during the 3 nuclear security summits between 2009 and 2016. In this setting, Pakistan was able to show to the world the effectiveness it had gained in nuclear and radiological material protection, control, and accounting, to the degree that its Nuclear Security Institute was certified to provide courses on NPCNA on a regional basis, working together with the International Atomic Energy Agency. This attempt to play to the strengths of Pakistan in the non-proliferation realm has not paid specific benefits in getting them to scale back their nuclear deployments. I do acknowledge and recognize that fact. But it did serve to challenge them to show that they could be a good guy in this arena and take initiative to prevent proliferation. To me, that is a good worth having. It also served to engage them in a constant dialogue where messages about the costs, both political and economic, of a nuclear weapons program could be steadily aimed at them. I understand that they are now engaged in the current administration's CEND initiative, that is the initiative to create the environment for nuclear disarmament. So I hope that this effort to play to their strengths continues. I haven't been able to really get to the heart of what has been going on with Pakistan and India, for that matter, in the CEND initiative, but I do hope that they are continuing to draw them out where they are willing and able to make a good contribution. One final comment here, and I'd be glad to embark on a discussion about this during our Q&A period, but in the past, policymakers have been unwilling to engage with India and Pakistan beyond exhorting them with the use of various carrots and sticks to get rid of their nuclear weapons, and certainly U.S. policy was very much focused in that area. I have concluded that it is better to engage them as states possessing nuclear weapons, not investing them with any kind of legitimacy in the NPT regime. Clearly they have eschewed the NPT regime, but recognize that they are a state possessing nuclear weapons, and in that context try to ensure that they are responsible non-proliferation actors, at the same time continuing to message them hard and constantly about the costs of nuclear weapons. The last principle I will talk about is to be open-minded to ad hoc solutions to proliferation problems. Of course, it goes without saying that we must maintain and nurture the Non-Proliferation Treaty or the Chemical Weapons Convention and use the tools that flow from them. Sometimes, however, the tools are not fully fit for purpose, and then we must look around to see what else we can do. An example is the successful campaign to remove tons of chemical weapons, nerve agents, their precursors, and mustard agent from Syria in 2014. The success of this international effort has been muffled by the failure of Syria to live up to its obligations not to use the chemical chlorine in warfare once it had signed up to the CWC. I've heard it mentioned that somehow the Syrian government did not realize that chlorine, any chemical used as an agent of warfare, is banned by the Chemical Weapons Convention. They thought, well, hey, it's out there. But in any event, that's an aside. It did allow the chemical weapons that it had in its declared stockpile to depart. Russia has aided and abetted Syria's bad behavior by not permitting attribution of chlorine in Syria being blamed on the Assad regime. They are really focused on ensuring that it's, in their perspective, the Assad regime opponents that are taking blame for these chlorine attacks. So what had been a significant good news story became a bad news story. but the fact remains that 1,200 metric tons of chemical weapons left Syria in an operation that involved a large ad hoc coalition, including the NATO countries, Russia and China, with regional countries such as Libya also playing a role. Stripped to its essentials, the operation was a marvel of efficient ad hocery. Individual NATO countries, Norway and Denmark in particular, took responsibility for ensuring that the chemicals were safely transported out of Syria. And Russia and China were active in providing security to the operation, taking a kind of precedent from the anti-piracy campaign off of Somalia that was also in train during that period. The United States provided the means of elimination for the chemical agents, and they did so cleanly on a ship at sea, the Cape Ray. Here, Libya agreed that the United States could operate the ship in its territorial waters for a significant amount of time, with the assurance that no chemical effluents from the destruction process would be discharged into its waters. And the diplomacy was carried out by a loose triumvirate that involved the United Nations as the international entity with sufficient access and authority to remove chemical weapons around Syria that were around Syria during a civil war, the Russian Federation, who had influence with the Syrian regime and was not yet so wholly invested in it back during that period, seems hard to believe at this time, and the United States, who had posed the challenge to Assad to get rid of his chemical weapons or face a U.S. bombing campaign. By the way, the OPCW, the implementing organization of the CWC, the Chemical Weapons Convention, was also involved, but in the initial period there were limitations to how much they could be involved because Assad was not, Syria was not yet a party to the Chemical Weapons Convention. The decision to pursue the option of getting the chemical weapons out of Syria is often read as the failure of President Obama to enforce a red line. I read it differently. We succeeded in getting Assad to give up his declared chemical weapons stockpile, which was President Obama's demand. However, we did not succeed in getting Assad to stop using chemicals in warfare. Once again, the multiple chlorine attacks that have been fought over ever since in the UN Security Council. We can argue over whether the international effort therefore failed, but I would argue that as dastardly as the chlorine attacks have been, it is better that they did not involve lethal nerve agent. So to recap, I believe that we should be doing some rethinking and some adaptation of U.S. arms control and non-proliferation strategies with awareness of what we have learned from the past, drawing on concepts and principles that have taken shape over time. We should use freedom to mix to ease force structure planning and arms control regimes as long as essential parity is maintained. We should welcome the contribution that non-interference with national technical means can make to the verification process, especially easing on-site inspection requirements, allowing us to steer and set priorities in that arena. We should look for successful plays that can be rerun fairly easily in the arms reduction process. We should seek out innovations that have proven their worth and can be expanded into other uses, and here I'm thinking again of innovations that we have developed in the inspection procedures and protocols. We should play to the strengths of even the most doubtful interlocutors to advance non-proliferation goals, and we should embrace creative ad hoc solutions when other tools are not fully fit for purpose. These are some examples. I know there are others out there. I invite you to think of for yourselves about what other examples may be out there. But my main point today is to urge us to consider the knowledge base that has been accumulated over the past 40 years of implementing the various regimes. In this era, when it is fashionable to declare that arms control is dead, I fear that we are in danger of abandoning this strong heritage so that when we embark anew on negotiating restraint on military systems, we will be forced to reinvent the wheel. That we should avoid at all costs. Before I conclude, I would like to say a word about the future of national technical means of verification, because I know, as I said at the outset, there is some interest in it here at the lab. In my view, it is time to update the notion of NTM to take into account commercial satellite constellations that may be equally exploited by both or all sides in an arms control treaty or agreement. I also believe that it's time to take into account the long-range reconnaissance drones that have become a fixture of intelligence gathering and also targeting in Afghanistan and the Middle East. It is well worth exploring, in my view, how to incorporate such systems, including the commercial constellations, into the concept of enhanced technical means, national technical means of verification. And it will take some doing, I understand, to think through this and then to implement it, particularly working with commercial companies and seeing how they would relate to all of this. By the way, there's another interesting facet here, and that is selling it to others at the negotiating table. As you may be aware, in 2011, I gave a Drell lecture at Stanford where I first began rolling out some of these ideas, took them to Moscow, had a lecture at a very, well-placed institution, the Moscow State Institute for International Relations, MGIMO, top-class students, top-of-the-line students there. And the questions they raised were very interesting. They said, our government will never accept the authority and legitimacy of information flowing from commercial satellite assets, period. Now that was their view. This is 10 years ago at this point. Would be interesting to see how Russia's views may or may not have evolved on this, but the notion of authority and legitimacy of information flowing from the platforms, I think, will have to be confronted, and it's an interesting problem to confront. But I think a state may welcome enhanced national technical means as a way to confirm that it is undertaking unilateral measures, such as elimination of obsolete weapons or closure of certain facilities, rather than having to undertake a long negotiation to confirm what it was planning to do anyway. Perhaps a state would like to use national technical means as a way of confirming its unilateral actions. States may also use enhanced technical means as a way to advance the effectiveness of confidence building and related diplomatic processes. We are seeing that today with the use by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe of reconnaissance drones in the Donbass and the eastern Ukraine. Unfortunately, they are constantly being meddled with, and I pressed the Russians to say, should you not be incorporating the notion of non-interference into the protection of these important reconnaissance drone systems that are being used to try to bring about peace finally in the Donbass, at the minimum implementation of the Minsk process. So again, some interesting ideas to think about, but NTM have uses beyond where we have tended to focus, that is in the formal arms control process. And talking about the various ways that NTM may be used allows me to end on an important note. Not all arms control and non-proliferation policy advances have to be built on negotiated treaties and agreements. Sometimes unilateral measures can be just as useful, or normative principles, especially when their effectiveness can be backed up, for example, by national technical means of verification. As we pursue diversified approaches to arms control policy and non-proliferation policy, more ubiquitous NTM may help us to prove their worth. So I think I've talked enough. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation this morning, and thank you very much once again. Thank you to Brad for the opportunity to be before you this day. Thanks.